one is the level 2 Engineering Operative Standard. Okay, so the things that we have. I'm going to give you a brief overview as to who SIAS are and what we do. So some of you, I know that you're already familiar with us, and some of you I think are new. So just give you a bit of an understanding as to where we're from. An overview of the level 2 Engineering Operative Standard, how we track the apprenticeship against the standard, preparing for endpoint assessment, and then thinking about how the employer is going to be involved in that endpoint assessment as well. As I previously said, we've got some space for questions at the end, but if you do have anything as we are going through, please put it in the chat and then I will catch it. Those can be the first questions that I work through at the end. So then, Science Industry Assessment Service, this is SIAS, all right? So we specialise for endpoint assessment for roles within R&D, production and engineering, analytical services, right across the manufacturing, science and health sectors. So we were set up a few years ago now in response to the science standards, but more recently and continue to do so, we are going to move into the engineering sector. So what do we do then? Well, actually, we design all of the assessment tests in line with the assessment plan. We deliver on those assessment tests and we make sure that they're all quality assured as well. We will register and train all of the SIAS assurers that may come onto your site in order to conduct endpoint assessment. And it is the responsibility of the endpoint assessment organisation, so SIAS, in order to claim the apprenticeship certificate. Okay, so once we have that, we will send that out to the apprentice at the address of the workplace. Okay, so things that we look at then, as I've just alluded to, we started out in science, but actually we're moving more into the engineering sector as well. So what we have is we've got the Science Manufacturing Process Operative at level 2, the Engineering Operative at level 2, and the Lean Manufacturing Operative at level 2. And if you're joining us in a couple of weeks' time, that's the Lean is the one we're going to be discussing then. Okay. We've got a host of level 3 standards there as well. So some of you may be familiar with the Science Manufacturing Technician at level 3. Obviously, we've got the Lab Technician at level 3 as well, Science Industry Maintenance Technician at level 3, and Maintenance and Operations Technician, Engineering Technician as well at level 3, so they're more standard. And in addition to that, we've got the higher level standards as well. So we've got the Technician Scientist, which covers the sort of retired lab scientist. This is the original lab scientist one. So we've got that level 5 there. We've actually got the new lab scientist degree apprenticeship at level 6. We've got the Science Industry Process Plant Engineer for level 6 and the Research Scientist at level 7. So there's quite a broad spectrum of standards there that we service. Today then, we're going to talk about the level 2 Engineering Operative. And I think, as I've said, I've spoken to a few of you about it already, but I think it's gaining momentum, isn't it? That it's getting a little bit more popular sort of as we're going through. What does it look like then? What does it cover? So this is all about carrying out a range of engineering operations. It's a level 2 standard. Funding band's about 6,000. And the duration is about a 12-month average training period. Following that 12 months training period, we go into the EPA window, which is about a further 3 months. Okay, so we're looking at a further 12 weeks on top of that. There's core knowledge, skills and behaviours, and then there's 6 specialist job roles that relate to that. So an apprentice during endpoint assessment must demonstrate their competency against the core knowledge, skills and behaviours, and then against one of the 6 specialist job roles. So there's maintenance in there, mechanical manufacturing, electrical and electronic engineering, fabrication, materials processing and finishing, and tech support as well. Okay, so there's quite broad reach in there. I think some of you that I've definitely spoken to anyway, I think that probably the most popular ones, or the ones that you've had most probably uptake in, has been along the lines of the maintenance, the manufacturing, the fabrication maybe, and a little bit of the electrical as well. I haven't come across that many people to date that have done or that have registered on the materials processing or finishing. So if you do, it'd be interesting to speak to you. Gateway requirements then. So what we've got mandated quals in this. So we've got the level 2 diploma in engineering operations. Remember, this is competence and knowledge. Your apprentices must have achieved a level 1 English and maths, and they must sit that test for level 2. They don't necessarily have to have passed it, but they must sit the test for level 2 in order to go through the gateway. Equally, you might have apprentices that have come in and they've actually got their functional skills at level 2, or indeed they've got the GCSEs, and that's absolutely fine. That's a tick in the box already for that one. Gateway requirement equally for this is that we are looking for evidence in the form of a reflective portfolio, and I'm going to come on to that. We've got a slide in a couple of slides time, just with a little bit more detail about, well, what is the reflective portfolio and what does it look like and what should it do? And then we've got the sign off on a competence evaluation log. which, if you're familiar with SIAS and you've worked with us before, we service all of our standards with a Competency Evaluation Log. And it is a booklet that the employer signs to say, yes, my apprentice is ready for endpoint assessment. Okay, so the employer makes that signatory on it, and it is to say that their apprentice is safe and competent in the role, they are ready to pass through the gateway. Okay. So then we've got two methods of assessment for the engineering operative standard. Okay, we've got the practical observation and we've got the professional discussion. Your apprentice can only achieve a pass or a fail in the practical observation. There is no higher grade available. If your apprentice was going to achieve those higher grades, so the distinction, they'd be looking to do so in the professional discussion. Okay, so the two methods of assessment there, we are looking to sort of facilitate this in terms of about a half a day practical observation, followed by the professional discussion. What we're going to do now is take a look at the practical observation and the discussion in a little bit more detail. So then, what is this practical observation? Well, it's looking to validate the apprentice's competency by observing them carrying out their job role. Okay, we are looking for something that lasts about 2 hours, and it should really be in the apprentice's workplace. And if not, it needs to be in an EPA or approved centre. It should be in a realistic working environment, though. All right. As I've said right at the top, we are looking to assess apprentices against their core knowledge, skills and behaviours, as well as their chosen specific job role options as well. All right. Within this 2 hour period, we are thinking of a task that is, well, 1 or 2 tasks depending on what we've got there. And again, it will be in line with the apprentice's job role. So we'll provide a little bit more detail or I'll talk a little bit more how we plan that in sort of as we're going through the presentation. And the apprentice will be asked up to 3 to 6 open questions during the observation. As it starts, well, your apprentices will be asked questions during, they are not held back till the end, they are sort of peppered throughout the observation. And you can think that the apprentice will probably get, in terms of if you think of the knowledge that's related to the practical observation aspect, there's about 6 knowledge statements there. So if we think along the lines, your apprentice will probably be asked about 6, closer to the 6 mark than the 3 mark in terms of questions. Okay, but as we're going through that, I'll talk to you a little bit more about what they're going to be like. What we would say, and just this is advice for your apprentices, if your apprentice is going through this and it is feasible, we would ask them to provide a little bit of commentary over the practical observation whilst they are doing it. So for example, what kind of paperwork are they using? What information have they getting from that paperwork in order to complete the task? I appreciate it's not always feasible to do that, and that is absolutely fine. But if your apprentices can do that, what that will do is facilitate the questioning, because what that does, it starts to demonstrate the thought process as they're going through this endpoint assessment. So that might sort of keep the questions down a little bit towards as they are going through, as your apprentice is going through observation. We do like to be supported by the employer for this, and we refer to this person from the employer representative. Okay. And again, towards the end, I'm going to talk a little bit like, well, who is this employer representative and what do they do? Okay. If we now think about the professional discussion then, this is going to take about 40 minutes. And now we're going to look at, well, actually, what were the knowledge, skills and behaviours that weren't picked up during the practical observation, and how do they fall in line against the apprenticeship standard? Okay, so we're thinking about a 40-minute discussion. So as I've said, if you think about your practical observation, which is up to 2 hours, and then you've got your 40-minute discussion, you're probably thinking about the whole of EPA for one apprentice will take about a half a day. Okay. Your professional discussion, or the apprentice's professional discussion, is based on around 5 to 7 questions. These are categories of questions, all right? So if the SIAS assurer thinks that there is more to be had, they will ask a follow-up question, and that doesn't count as one of the 5 to 7. Okay, and I've got, as I've said, I've got a section on some question categories to share with you in a second. This will be chaired by the SIAS assurer and the employer representative. So we are wanting the employer representative to be a part of the observation, and they can also sit in on the professional discussion. They are not invited to necessarily, or they would only be invited to comment by the SIAS assurer, and it will be to sort of clarify processes and procedures of the organisation. So if you think the employer representative along the lines of a bit of a local expert, okay? This discussion will be based on a reflective portfolio of evidence, and we're looking for that to be submitted about 2 weeks before the endpoint assessment date. All right. Now, depending on how you capture your portfolio of evidence in terms of if you're a provider, if you're using, let's say, an e-learning portfolio or a one-file account or a VQ or Smart Assessor or something along the lines of that, what we would ask for is we would say, can we have a login? The same way you would give an EV a login. So can you have a login just so we can see that the portfolio that we need to see about 2 weeks beforehand? And if it is paper-based, Instead, what we do have is a SharePoint account that we're going to be opening up to all of our providers, and we would say, please, can you just upload it to your SharePoint area, as I've said, that 2 weeks prior, and then we can look at it from there. Okay. So sticking along the lines of this must be signed off by the employer to authenticate that it is the apprentice's evidence and it is a true reflection of what they have been doing. It does need to be submitted this 2 weeks prior to EPA, because what happens is it is reviewed by the assessor and it informs the professional discussion. It isn't marked, all right, but it does inform that discussion, and it does give the SIAS assurer a little bit of time to think about the kinds of questions that they're going to ask the apprentice. It should be taken from sort of the last 3 months of the training programme. Now, this is saying if your apprentice is on about a 12 months duration, all right? So we are thinking in terms of the apprentice being able to demonstrate their sort of highest and broadest knowledge, skills and behaviours, and that's why we say sort of from the last 3 months, because actually that's when they're at their most competent. But equally, if you're running a programme that's maybe a little bit longer than that, you maybe going to say from the last 4 months, all right? But, you know, as the provider, you can sort of make that judgment. What we're saying is it shouldn't be anything sort of within that first, when the apprentices are becoming fully, when they're not quite fully trained and they're not quite fully competent yet. All right. We're looking for around about 2 to 3 activities to include at least one situation where it was potentially challenging and how they overcome that challenge. All right. So 2 to 3 activities. And we're thinking about at least one of them, or at least one of those activities might allude to a situation or have been, has had a situation whereby the circumstances were challenging, the operation was challenging, whatever that was, and how did they overcome that? All right. Kinds of evidence that we're going to put in there then. So, as I can see, there's something in the chat. I'm going to just leave it. I'll finish this slide off and then we'll come to that at the end. The things that we're going to have in there. So we've got things like photographs, images, diagrams. What else? Job observations, witness evidence testimonies. When we're thinking about observations, we're thinking about something that's a direct observation. We're not wanting any kind of opinions in there. All right, it should be based on fact. There should be very much just a witness testimony if it is maybe a member of the employer that has done an observation of the apprentice. It should not include any form of self-assessment or self-appraisal. When we're thinking about the images, diagrams, it might be SOPs, it might be risk assessments, it might be anything along the lines of that. What we're needing is the apprentice to be able to talk about it, all right? So if you think about the discussion is going to be based around the apprentice's job role. So as we said, we're wanting 2 or 3 jobs from the apprentices. You know, what is it they've been doing? That's the way the questions are going to be asked. Tell me about a time when. Can you describe a situation where? All right. So whatever goes into that evidence portfolio, it is not marked, but the apprentice must be able to talk about it. All right. When I've just said then, if we're thinking about like SOPs, risk assessments, things like that, it's not necessarily that the apprentice themselves has written it. The likelihood is at level 2 they possibly haven't, but they can use it. Okay, they can look at it and go, right, this from this document, this is what I now need to do. Okay, so that's the kinds of things that we're looking for in there. If we think about the categories of questions then that are going to come from the professional discussion, well, actually, we've said anything between 5 to 7 questions. We've broken this down into about 6 questions taken from the following categories. And as I've said, there will be follow-up questions in there if we think there's a bit more to be had from your apprentice. Okay, so the categories of questions come from, and these don't fall in order, by the way, and I'll talk to you about why in a second. But we've got health and safety, communications, engineering practices. Now we're going to have generic engineering practices, and that's to fit in line with the knowledge, skills and behaviours. And then we're going to have job role specific ones as well. Okay, so if you think about, I think there's electrical and electronic engineering, talks about cable types. So if you think along the lines of that's what the job specific part of the engineering practices is going to be in there. We've got a little bit of problem solving in there. Hence why they're asking for a situation that might have been challenging, that was overcoming, to go into that portfolio of evidence. And then we've got some CPD as well. So again, that's now thinking about, well, how was the apprentice trained? And equally, have they taken any sort of CPD in terms of the challenging situations, which they might not, but they will have covered CPD as they're going through. Again, these questions, so these are the categories of questions that your apprentice is going to be asked. We are not thinking that they're going to be asked necessarily in that order. What we would do is when we get into a discussion with the learner, we're going to ask them a question 0, all right? And all that does is tries to put them at ease a little bit. And that question would be along the lines of, tell me a little bit about your job, okay? And all that does is we're just trying to make the apprentice feel might be a little bit nervous when they're going in. They normally associate discussions or interviews, particularly with jobs. So this is probably the first time they're being assessed in terms of an apprenticeship like this. All right, they've probably never been through school and done something like this, put it that way. So that's why we're going to give them that question 0. The time obviously won't start until we ask them a question taken from that category. So they've still got that 40 minutes to do the discussion and hit the sort of 6 questions or the 6 question areas. But we will ask them that question 0 just to try and facilitate and make them feel a little bit more comfortable. All right. So then, if we're thinking about tracking the apprenticeship, well, what does SIAS provide in order to do that? How do we know that the apprentice is progressing against the standard? Okay. Well, actually, we might see the progress of the learner during doing the job. So we might have observations. They might be getting on really well at work. You know, they've been in the job now for the last 3-4 months. They've done lots of CPD. They've done lots of that training. We've got some good witness testimonies from maybe their mentor say. They've actually written a couple of reflective accounts. We've got Q&As. We've got job reports there. And that will show the progress. Obviously, we've got the use of the tech cert. So we've got the EL diploma for the knowledge and their competency. Might have some additional qualifications in there or workplace training. They might have been asked to go and do an IOSH or some manual handling, anything along the lines of that. They're going to start developing a reflective portfolio of evidence. Now, although we've said actually this reflective portfolio should be the sort of highest and broadest knowledge that they're demonstrating, it would actually be a really good idea to sort of get the apprentices thinking along the same mindset right as when they start. So actually they might start putting a file of evidence together, but you know, that is only based on the competency at that time. So maybe that bit won't be used right at the end, but it just gets them in the habit of thinking, okay, then what kind of evidence is this? How does it fit in? How would I talk about it? And equally, as a provider, if you're going to do mock-ups along the way, you might say, well, actually at the 6-month mark, we'll do a little bit of a mock-up. And actually, I'm only going to assess them on the first 6 months of training that they've done. So, you know, they can have that reflective portfolio for that. What we would say, however, is that all the development, all the training, the teaching and the learning, it should be tracked against the standard, because on the day, that's what we are coming in to assess, all right? Has the apprentice met the apprenticeship standard, okay? Can they demonstrate all of the knowledge, skills and behaviours as prescribed by that standard, all right? What do you do then? So, when you register your apprentices with SIAS, we will issue you 2 booklets. We've got the SIAS Competency Evaluation Log. So I said right at the top end there, this was something that might go to you as the provider, but actually it is the employer's responsibility to sign off at the end to say that their apprentice is ready for endpoint assessment. Okay, so that comes in. The blue log is very much the blue cell rather is very much a sign off for the end. The one you see underneath there is the competency tracker. Now again, so this is, if you imagine, it's a bit of a SIAS signature. We provide these documents for every standard that we service. So what we've got here is the Engineering Operative Tracker. And what this does is, this is optional, but what it does do is it allows you to track the apprentice's progress directly against the standard. Okay, so I do appreciate that you've got obviously the quals to do as well, and you might already have a system in place to do that, but this document will also allow you to do that. This, it says optional here. We do not check site. We don't need sight of that at the end or anything. This would just be if you did want to use it. Okay. From the Competency Evaluation Log. So, sorry, a page, not a slide. You will see here that it says the evidence record, and it's got all the knowledge, well, it's all the knowledge, skills and behaviour statements that is aligned with the assessment plan. And you will see it says evidence record evaluated by organisation and a sign off. Now, again, it must be the employer that signs off against this. What the employer is signing to say is that the training has taken place, not necessarily that the employer has facilitated that training, because the likelihood is, although they may have done some of it, the provider will have done the bulk of it. Okay, so when it says evidence record, all we are looking for is that where is the signpost to say that your apprentice can obtain the necessary job instructions. And it might be that actually you are using an online portfolio account, like one file, and so your evidence record there would be one file. Okay, so I always stress this to the employers as we're going through this. It's not necessary to say that they've done the training. The likelihood is you as the provider did. But actually, it's just to say that they are aware that the training has taken place. Okay, so that's the cell. That's the mandatory document, or that one's the mandatory document there that the employer will sign against. This page here is taken from the Competency Tracker. So what we do with this one is break down every single knowledge, skill and behaviour that has been aligned against the standard and said, oh, okay, then what kinds of things do we mean by that? So this one is relevant statutory quality, environmental compliance procedures or systems, organisational health and safety regulations relevant to the engineering operations. So all we've said here is, well, actually, these are the things you might want to think about. And as you can see, it's a K2, so this is a core knowledge. So this goes across all 6 pathways. So you will see that it says Health and Safety at Work Act. We all work to that. But equally, relevant health and safety regulations relating to your environment. All right. So actually now it's getting the apprentice to think about, okay, then, so what specifically is related to me? And it might be that even you think about, environmental regs or quality standards, we might be thinking about British standards, ISO, apprentices might be on COMAR sites. So there's lots of different things where apprentices may be in specific environments that there is some pertinent legislation or regulation that they need to know about and be aware of when they are completing their job. So what we'd say is if your apprentice can demonstrate or has some evidence against each of A, B and C and D statements, that would allow them to say, okay, then actually, I think we've now fully covered K2. All right. Again, this can be used by the apprentice, it can be used by the employer or indeed the provider. And it's just a sign to say, yeah, we are happy that this has been fully covered. What you can do then is use this to inform the sign off of the competency evaluation log at the end. So actually, if we say, well, actually, where is this? Where is the signpost for that one? Well, it was a direct observation. We can put a tick in the box to say, yes, where is it? It's on my OneFile account or it's in my paper portfolio, and we'll have a little date there as well. So that could just be transferred into the cell towards the end. All right. So then we've talked a little bit about endpoint assessment, what it looks like, what it feels like. We've talked a bit about the sort of evidence that we need to generate on the way there. Now we're going to think about how do we prepare for that endpoint assessment? What do we need to do? Who needs to do it? And when do they need to do it by? So I've put a bit of a timeline on the side here. Please, these are not hard and fast dates, all right? These are just, it's just for demonstrative purposes, and it's based on a 12-month program. Okay, you might have your apprentices on a 15-month program, so therefore, you can alter these as you will. What we do say is about 6 to 9 months before the planned end date, we will issue you with an endpoint assessment preparation pack, all right? And I'm going to talk to you about what that is in a second. However, if you think, particularly as a provider, you would like sight of that straight away, so on registration, please let us know and we will just send you it, okay? We will send this to the employer and we will send this to the provider as well. And all it does is it'll give you a bit of guidance as to what the endpoint assessment is going to look like, methods of assessment broken down a little bit further. Sort of about 4 to 6 months before the end, we are going to run a SIAS and employer representative induction program. So this isn't for the provider, this is very much for the employer. We want them to take part of this induction process, and I've got a couple of slides about it shortly that will talk about, what they need to do, what it's going to look like, all of that kind of thing. And then we're going to start thinking about commencing the EPA scheduling process. So what we mean by that is saying, okay, then, so is your apprentice on track to complete the diplomas? Let's say, for sake of argument, yes, they are. Actually, June's going to be our end date. So we're looking for something sort of any time after mid-June or the end of June. Okay, so that's what we mean by that. When we're thinking about the preparing for EPA, preparing the apprentice pack, we will issue you guides to, as I've said, to the employer and the provider, and we can do this basically as soon as you register. So if you register, please just put that request in, because if you do want to start doing more things like that, maybe you might be doing interim from, let's say, month 6, just for sake of argument. You might want to start using these tools then, and that's absolutely fine. But we will send them out to you anyway, sort of about 6 to 9 months before the end. Within that, you're going to have a preparing for the practical observation and a preparing for the professional discussion. So the practical observation will cover the preparing for, the guidance will cover what kind of tasks you might want to do, the kind of time frame that we're working to. We will say, well, actually, these are the things that we're marking against. And what you'll end up getting is a bit of guidance based around, well, that will cover your apprentice's job-specific role as well, okay? Preparing for the professional discussion, again, so the professional discussion, it will give you the categories of questions. It's going to tell you the way in which we ask those questions. We'll give you an exemplar question with an answer there, so you can see a little bit about what kinds of things we're expecting. We're going to give you a little bit of guidance around the reflective portfolio, how it should be submitted, what it needs to look like, and all of that kind of thing. So we will issue that, and that will allow you as a provider to then start facilitating mock-ups, and if you use those, they're probably going to be fairly realistic mock-ups. All right. So if you're using these documents, we would advise that you did, but they are not mandated. Like I say, it just gets the apprentice sort of into the mindset of thinking about, right, okay, then what is this going to look like? What is it going to feel like on the day? Okay. Then we're thinking, right now, so 3 months before that end, as I've said, these are just illustrative timelines, just so you can see, but we are looking to confirm the EPA date. All right. So let's say I just said before, we're thinking, we're on track for a tech cert. We get through and we think, right, can we confirm this EPA date? I did say mid-June, maybe I want to now push it to the end of June, okay, and then we'll start saying, right, so as I've said right at the top there, we're looking for about a half day of assessment per apprentice. So if you're a company and you've got a couple of apprentices, you might go, right, I want apprentice A on the morning of Monday, I want apprentice B on Monday afternoon, C Tuesday morning, and D Tuesday afternoon, just for sake of argument, and that might be how you want to do it. Well, then it does say here 2 months before the EPA date, we're going to request gateway evidence. Obviously, this does not include the reflective portfolio. Your reflective portfolio should come to us about 2 weeks before, submitted 2 weeks before the assessment date. The gateway evidence that we are looking for is qualifications in English and maths and any mandatory quals. It might be at this point, particularly 2 months before the end, you mightn't have that yet, they mightn't have finished yet. What we would say is we don't necessarily have to wait for a certificate, but what we do need is something from, let's say, AEL to say, yes, your apprentice has in their achievement, okay? And I think you can get printouts and things, and that would work, but it must be something from AEL to say, so it doesn't have to be a certificate necessarily, but it has to be some form of evidence from the awarding organisation to say this is the apprentice and this is the achievement that they've made during this qualification. Where they're going to look to approve that gateway evidence, and then obviously we can commence the end-point assessment. So then, this is about the sort of last part of the presentation that we're going to go through. And it's thinking about now, how do we engage with the employer, the role of the employer representative in the end-point assessment. So this now is thinking about the employer's role and their facilitation at the end. Okay, so it's not the provider that we look to, although the provider does a lot of the work during the training period. It's very much the employer. So who is this employer representative then? I've referred to them as a local expert as we're going throughout, but they must be someone who is nominated by the employer. Okay. They should be competent in the occupation that is being assessed. They should have some recent CPD. They might be professionally registered. They might not be. They should have a qualification at the same level or higher, or they might have worked there for the last 10, 15, 20 years, the work experienced. What we're trying to say by this is that it shouldn't necessarily be someone from HR or an L&D manager, okay? Unless they are occupationally competent in the role that the apprentice is doing, they can't facilitate this, okay? Because we're trying to look to the employer representative as the person who has got experience. So the SIAS assurers that are coming on site, they are all time served and have experience of the role, but they mightn't have worked in that kind of environment before. So they would look to that employer representative to go, is this right in accordance with your process, procedure, and all of that kind of thing, okay? So that's why we need this person to be occupationally competent. What they do is they complete a SIAS application form and they provide a bit of evidence that they are occupationally competent. So we're looking along the lines of CVs, copies of certificates of achievement, and equally if they have, or if they are just work experienced, then we would see if they can have a statement from their line manager just to say Joe Bloggs is competent to facilitate endpoint assessment for my level 2, whoever the apprentice name is. All right, so it would just be a statement to say, they've worked here for so long, they are occupationally competent in order to facilitate the endpoint assessment. All right. What we then go through then, so it completes application form, and ultimately it is just it's an application to make sure, or for us to make sure that they are occupationally competent. We then put them through an SIAS induction. Okay, so the induction covers assessment methods, their role in, So sorry about that. So the SIAS induction then, what does that cover? It covers the SIAS sign-off, so the competency evaluation log. What is the employer signing for? Okay, where do they need to sign? Who else can sign it? All right, that kind of thing. We're going to talk to them about the apprenticeship assessment methods in there. So practical observation, professional discussion, and what their role is for those two assessment methods. Equally, what we need them to start thinking about is particularly the support and the assessment data in terms of this practical observation. So as I've said, they are going to be responsible for doing the gateway review and signing off the competency evaluation log. Remember, that's saying the apprentice is safe and competent, they are ready for endpoint assessment, not that they have done all of the training personally and they know the ins and outs of it all. It's not that, it's that they're safe and competent and ready for APA. And equally about supporting this assessment day. So thinking about the plan for the practical observation. So we're going to say to the employer, look, this is what we're marking against. We want you now to plan in a task that's going to allow the apprentice to demonstrate their competencies in these areas. All right. We want that employer to help the apprentice prepare for that practical observation. And that might be as well when you as the provider might come in and facilitate that as well. So in terms of doing, I mean, you've probably done mock-ups before this point, but in terms of going, all right, then let's do a dry run. So there is no reason when an employer plans in the tasks, whatever the apprentice is going to do, that they can't do a dry run on that. They can't do a bit of a dress rehearsal on it and go, right, I'm going to do it timed, see how we get on, all of that kind of thing. It is, however, this person, so the employer representative, that we are looking to liaise with SIAS about the content of the practical observation, and we also want them to host us when we come onto site. We do want that very same person to be a part of the practical observation, and as I've said, they will provide us with guidance on their workplace policy, practice, procedures, all of that kind of thing. What will happen beyond the practical observation, we do ask the employer representative to make notes as they're going through that observation. We provide them with a little observation form. And we do ask them to sit down with the SIAS assurer beyond the observation and just say, let's review our documentation. You know, how did it go? How do we feel about it? It is the role of the SIAS assurer, however, to make that decision about the grade on the observation, okay, about whether there is enough competency demonstrated from the apprentice to award a pass, okay. So that is how that will work. And then equally, that same employer representative can sit on the panel during the professional discussion as well. And again, they could only be there, they are only there rather to provide guidance on workplace policy and procedure, and they will only be invited to talk again by the SIAS assurer. They can't just sit in and chip in, you know, as and when they see fit. All right. So then, completing observation schedule. We go through this the employer representative induction. We give them a little bit of advice. So as I've said, we say this is the thing, these are the areas we're marking against. You know, can you plan a task or tasks in for your apprentice to be able to demonstrate their competency? What we're looking for is that they plan something in that provides the sufficient scope to cover all of the specification that basically we are marking against. If an employer plans something in, obviously it comes through to us, we have a little look at it. If we look at that and what we're looking for, that there's enough detail that we went, right, if we go on site and we see all of that happen, that looks like a pass on paper, that looks like there's enough in those tasks for that apprentice to pass. If we don't think that there is, or we think that sometimes I get them in, it's just a keyword, and I think, well, the greatest will in the world, I can't make head nor tail of that. Because you just told us about a piece of equipment. I don't know what anybody's going to be doing with that equipment. So we will just go back to the employer and say, look, we need a little bit more detail here. We number all of the elements down the side that we're marking against, and then we'd say, right, so let's say, for example, sake of argument, element number 3, we need a little bit more detail there. You know, how does this fit with the apprentice job role? What are they going to be doing? How will they use this? That kind of thing. All right. As I've said, this planning phase allows us and the employer to have a very full picture of how that assessment day is going to be run. So what it takes to get to assessment day in terms of the sign-off and the gateway requirements. And then actually, when we get to assessment day, we're coming onto site. What is it going to look like? Apologies for that, because that says knowledge assessment, practical observation, technical interview. Obviously, there is no knowledge assessment, so I'll take this out before you get a copy of it. But for the practical observation and the professional discussion. Okie dokes. That there then is pretty much the end. So we have whistled through that. I did